Jane Richards joined Global Engineers WSP in 1998 and is recently head of building structures, leading a large team of some 500 structural engineers. She has a particular interest and expertise in high-rise building and in modular construction. So Jane, MMC is high on the agenda today, but way back in the noughties, you were working on with the Unite group, which used modular on all its projects. But the impact of the downturn following the 2008-2009 global financial crisis made them realize that the slowdown it meant that they couldn't keep the factory going. So more recently, you've also been working with Barclay on their off-site project. And they've got a big factory now, haven't they, in Erith. So as we face difficult times ahead, how does this growing industry really make sure it can maintain a sustainable balance between demand and supply and keep the factories going?
Well, I think what we're seeing now, Peter, in MMC, it's a much wider initiative. So the two examples you've given there are still very specific around a particular developer and the way they want to deliver their own projects, and that's for different reasons. They've gone down the offsite modular route, but the big differences between those two systems that are 15 years apart is that the Barclay system's got much more flexibility. So I think that's one of the lessons we've learned. Get flexibility in the systems. You've got more chance then of riding out these different waves or pipeline, and you can be a bit more diverse in how you apply it. But for me, the really interesting thing that seems to be changing this time round, when we've got a bit more sort of challenge in the economy, is that MMC is starting to become part of the solution out of that. And I think that's, it's almost now government-led, this initiative. With the construction sector deal white paper from a few years back, that has really led to sort of more direction from some of the government procuring department, and they are directing that MMC needs to be part of the solution. So when they procure, they're expecting to see more digital tools, use more sort of digital twin type of approach to a project, and also the projects themselves need to be designed in such a way that MMC can easily be implemented. So I think that's the big change we're seeing this time, and that's why it will maintain itself.
I guess also Homes England and the idea of local authorities amalgamating together to create regular demand would also help, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, because it's difficult it's all right giving someone a directive that you should procure in favour of anyone who's putting forward MMC, but if you're a small local authority and you've only got a pipeline of relatively small projects, how do you make those attractive and create that critical mass that someone's going to put forward or prioritize your scheme as one of the ones that they're going to be going for? And I think that aggregation that you've described there is definitely one of the ways that can be made attractive. But it's not just that. I mean, actually, I think local authorities, and certainly Homes England, they know it well, that they are actually very attractive. They've got big programs relatively. And I think if they start to do more in what Homes England are doing and thinking of themselves as a large portfolio, a large program of works, and then start to procure sort of with that in mind, that's making a change as well, rather than seeing everything as a one-off sort of procurement.
Now, to go to another issue today, the fire safety bill, which is focused on the protection of taller buildings over 18 meters, but that doesn't mention MMC, modular or offsite construction. And I know that insurance companies have now written to the government asking if MMC should be considered in comparison to traditional methods. Do they have a point, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. So I think, part of me is it's relatively new. I mean, it's not brand new, but MMC is relatively new in the overall context of sort of construction industry. So I think we've all got to accept that when you're introduced something new, then yes, all of those bodies, like the insurance sort of organisations, have got to be informed. They've got to be brought with it and understand it, and we've got to respond to any doubts and queries that they have. What I would say though is that inherently MMC is all about giving that sort of opportunity to standardize details, perfect them, get them right, get the interfaces right. Also do it in obviously in an off-site environment where you can properly test and quality assure, and think in advance about what all those interfaces need to be in order to deliver the fire integrity or just the performance of the building. So inherently it should be better than traditional. But that's not to say that there wouldn't be teething problems, and that we've got to, we've got to make sure that that happens. So, but I think fundamentally, once we get through that, we are talking about better quality assurance and therefore more surety and predictability, which has got to be good for the insurance industry.
True. So there's a lot of debate about tall buildings and sustainability. So what changes do you think we're going to see to the design of tall buildings as we aim to meet targets for net zero with new and retrofitted buildings by 2030?
Well, I think you've hit on one of the key things there, really. It's the retrofitting and reuse and recycling that has got to be, we've got to be trained ourselves to use that and design buildings in that way. I mean, interestingly, the 22 Bishopsgate project, which is one of ours, which is obviously the second tallest building in London now, just completing. We've done an exercise on that to look at what its carbon use is, what is energy efficiency overall as holistic building, and compare it with the criteria that are being set as benchmarks for a standard building. Now that building, although it's a very tall tower, it's actually 41% better in its performance than the average building. But when you drill down into why that is, we've reused 100% of the original foundations that were on the site. We've reused half of the 3-story basement that was there from a former project on the site. And we've designed it in such a way that we are then sort of bringing the loads back into positions that minimize the impact and minimize the sort of the extra work that we have to do to build the tower. So that's been quite a good lesson learned. So it can be done, but what we've got to keep doing is challenging ourselves to do more and more of that each time. At WSP, we have set ourselves the challenge that we're going to reduce the energy consumption of our buildings by 50%. And that's a very big challenge. And so we've got to start to really focus on how we're going to do that. And a lot of it is going to come around the opportunities to reuse what's there, what's already there, and also get the building to work as one whole, so that the MEP systems work with the structural systems. And that's what we see as the way forward. But there's an awful lot of research that we need to be progressing ourselves. We're challenging ourselves to not just for the last 20 years we've been using more cement replacements in our concrete, for example. In future, we want to be looking at the research that takes us to a cement-free position. So it's going to be tough, but if we don't start making the changes now, then we won't be where we need to be in sort of 25, 30 years' time.
So 22 Bishopsgate is all glass buildings. So all glass buildings will still be around in 2030, will they? I mean, in terms of new buildings.
Who knows? I mean, this is the thing. We just don't know what the future is going to hold for us at this point. It's going to make those drastic changes we've just talked about, though. I think buildings are going to have to be very different. And we talked about 22 Bishopsgate, you know, performing at 41% better than the current benchmark. But in truth, the current benchmarks are going to change. You know, we're going to have to keep making improvement after improvement until ultimately to get those final sort of reductions, we're actually going to end up making, I think, quite drastic changes to what our buildings um, look like, and also just the approach we take to the design as well. And we are, you know, we are challenging ourselves to start that, but it's going to be quite a drastic change of approach over the next sort of few decades.
Yes, well, I guess another of the big changes was that a lot of people were looking to CLT as a zero carbon material, but of course that's very difficult to use on taller buildings at the moment, isn't it?
Theoretically, you can build very tall buildings in timber. CLT, we're tending to use more for the floor plates themselves rather than the vertical structures. But you know, a tall timber building is certainly possible. And we are, you know, when we looked at CLT less than 10 years ago now, we were talking about buildings that were 6 stories. I mean, CLT buildings now are, you know, they're up to 14 stories plus, particularly in our sort of Scandinavian countries where our offices are designing CLT a lot. Of course, in the UK at the moment, we are checked with this 18-meter threshold where the use of CLT, particularly around the load-bearing facade, we're going to have a rethink on how we approach that. So we are in a slight sort of state of flux with CLT at the moment, but inherently it's a strong material and it's got a real place for the future in structural design.
So how are you planning for the post-pandemic economy? If you're dealing with a lot of tall buildings, I mean, tall building projects generally take more than one economic cycle to deliver. So will projects, do you think, carry on to meet future demand, or are you going to see people delaying things as they try and wait to see what happens to the global economy?
I think it's probably too early to say. You know, we're only really a few months into perceiving what that impact is. And with a lot of the government initiatives around the economy and so on, that's given a lot of developers, particularly, some reassurance. So they haven't stopped schemes, they've kept going. But I think in truth, it is a bit early to say. And I think, you know, I mean, you know us for tall buildings particularly, but actually what we see is because we've got a very diverse portfolio and we work across really all sectors. So what we're seeing is that there are definitely some sectors more affected than others. And within those sectors, the very tall buildings sort of starting at this point in time now. Some are still progressing, but I think, you know, it's fair to say that it's more the less risky projects and those associated with, you know, government infrastructure, which is still sort of getting a lot of backing, are really where we're starting to sort of see more of the focus of new work.
Yes, well, we'll, as you say, we'll have to wait and see how things turn out, not only just, of course, with post-COVID, but also post-Brexit too. So, Jane Richards, thank you very much indeed for your insights, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Peter. Good to speak. Bye.